Growing up, I always felt different. Not in the way that one might expect, by being the odd one out with quirky hobbies or unusual interests, but in a much deeper, more painful way. I never really understood it when I was younger, but looking back, it's clear that the difference came from how I was treated in my own home. My younger brother, David, was always the golden child. He was the one who could do no wrong, the one who could never be criticized, the one who had my mother's unwavering devotion. In contrast, I felt like I was just a background character in the story of our household, someone whose presence barely mattered. My mother loved David with an intensity that bordered on obsession. From the moment he could walk, she lavished attention on him. Every meal she cooked, every new outfit she bought him, every homework session she helped him with, it was all for David. She seemed to make it her mission to cater to his every need. If David needed help with his homework, she would do it for him. If David was upset, she would stop whatever she was doing to comfort him. It was as if he was the center of her world and everything else revolved around him. Meanwhile, I was left to fend for myself. I was the older sibling, yet I rarely received any of the attention or care David seemed to receive so effortlessly. If I needed help with school, I was told to ask my teachers. If I had issues with friends or bullies at school, my mother would tell me to toughen up. "Life isn't easy," she would say. "You need to learn to handle things on your own." My struggles, whether academic, emotional, or social, were often dismissed as insignificant. There was always a reason for my needs to be ignored, whether it was David's soccer game, his school project, or some other event that required her full attention. This unbalanced dynamic hurt, but I tried my best to convince myself that maybe I was just more independent, that I didn't need the same kind of attention or nurturing that David did. I told myself that maybe I was just different from other kids, more self-sufficient. But as I grew older, I realized this wasn't just about being independent, it was about being overlooked, even neglected. I could see that David was the one who was always praised, the one who always got the rewards. He was the one my mother cheered for, the one whose achievements were celebrated. And I was just there. I remember vividly the times I would get straight A's on my report card, hoping for some recognition, but my mother barely looked up from her phone. She would nod absently and mutter, "Good job," but it was clear that her mind was elsewhere. Yet when David tied his shoes for the first time, she clapped her hands and told him he was the smartest child in the world, as if he had just won an Olympic gold medal. I could never understand how something so small for David could be treated as a monumental achievement, while my own accomplishments seemed to fade into the background. David's behavior only seemed to solidify his status as the family's golden child. He was loud, boisterous, and naturally charismatic, traits that reminded everyone of my father. Our dad, though often distant and uninterested, had a certain fondness for David, admiring his extroversion and energy. On the other hand, I was quiet, reserved, and introverted. I preferred reading books and spending time alone to playing sports or hanging out with other kids. I didn't enjoy the attention David received, and I definitely didn't understand why my family treated him like he was the center of the universe. It wasn't that I wanted to be the center of attention, it was that I just wanted to be seen. I wanted to matter. This division between David and me became more pronounced as we got older. I became the family's quiet observer, constantly watching from the sidelines, never quite involved in the warmth and affection everyone seemed to shower David with. Even our extended family, our aunts, uncles, and grandparents, would fawn over David, praising him for his exuberance and achievements. They would always say things like, "David is going to do great things one day." Meanwhile, I stayed in the background, unrecognized for anything I did. But I didn't let it show. I tried to be the better sibling. Despite how David treated me, I tried to be there for him. I helped him with his homework when he couldn't understand something, I lent him my favorite toys when he wanted to play, and I even protected him from our parents' occasional harsh words. I did all these things because deep down I still wanted to be accepted by him. I hoped that one day he would see me as someone worth caring about, as someone who was just as important as he was. But the more I gave, the more I realized that David wasn't interested in reciprocating. He didn't need me. To him, I was just a convenient older sibling, someone he could push around, someone who could take the blame for anything that went wrong. As I entered my teenage years, the neglect from my family became more obvious, and the emotional gap between David and me only widened. My quiet nature, which once felt like a strength, began to feel like a curse. I became more self-conscious, more withdrawn. While David blossomed socially, surrounded by friends and constantly the life of the party, I was left alone, with few real connections. I tried to make friends, but they always seemed to gravitate toward David. He was the one everyone wanted to be around. He was the one who was funny, who could make people laugh, who could make a room light up just by being in it. Meanwhile, I sat on the edges trying not to draw attention to myself, too shy to participate in the chaos David so effortlessly thrived in. The contrast between us grew unbearable as time went on. David was loud, brash, and always the center of attention while I was quiet, introspective, and easily overlooked. I began to feel like I didn't belong in my own family. I was stuck, unnoticed, and relegated to the background while David soared. Even when I achieved something important, even when I worked hard for it, it always felt like David's needs took precedence. And as much as I tried to deny it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being erased. But the hardest part of it all was not just being ignored, it was knowing that no matter what I did, I would never be enough. No matter how hard I tried to prove myself, my achievements would always be overshadowed by David's loud personality and his ability to charm everyone around him. I wasn't the one who mattered. I wasn't the one who was worth fighting for. And so, I learned to cope with this reality. I convinced myself that maybe it was easier this way, that maybe it was better to stay in the shadows, to never ask for attention, to let David have his moment in the sun. But deep down it hurt. It hurt to know that no matter how much I gave, no matter how hard I worked, my family would always prioritize David. And that, above all else, was the most painful realization of all. As the years passed, the neglect and favoritism I experienced as a child morphed into something darker. David's treatment of me shifted from passive disregard to active cruelty. By the time I reached my teenage years, I was no longer just the invisible older sibling, I had become the target of his torment. It was no longer just about being overlooked. Now, I was being openly ridiculed and belittled by the one person who should have been on my side. David's behavior became increasingly hostile as we both grew older. The once playful teasing turned into cruel insults, and he reveled in making my life difficult. I was no longer just ignored, now I was mocked. He would call me names like Four Eyes because I wore glasses and Toothpick because of my slender frame. It wasn't just the name-calling though. He would ridicule everything about me, my love for reading, my quiet nature, even my appearance. He knew how much it hurt, but he didn't care. He found amusement in my pain. What hurt even more was that I couldn't escape his cruelty. It didn't matter where I went, whether it was at home or school, David's words followed me. At school, when I was already being bullied by my classmates, David decided to join in. Instead of defending me, he would stand by, laughing along with the bullies. He'd call me a loser, an embarrassment, and make sure the bullying didn't stop. I had hoped that, maybe, as we got older, things would change, that he would outgrow his need to make me feel inferior. But no, David didn't change. Instead, he found new ways to torment me, and the worst part was that my parents, especially my mother, tolerated it. Every time David did something cruel, every time he pushed me further into the depths of humiliation, my mother would shrug it off. "That's just how brothers are," she'd say, dismissing my pain like it was nothing. I would try to explain how much it hurt, how much David's words and actions stung, but it was always the same response. She never took me seriously. When David would read my diary, find my most vulnerable thoughts and insecurities, and share them with her, I was mortified. I would beg her to understand how wrong it was, but she just laughed it off, telling me I was overreacting. "That's just how brothers bond," she would say, as if being violated in such a personal way was just part of some rite of passage. I remember the day David put pebbles in my cereal, and how my mother thought it was funny. She didn't understand how the act, small as it may have seemed, represented years of mental and emotional strain. The tiny moments, the repeated acts of cruelty, were adding up to something much larger, something that began to feel unbearable. But the cruelty didn't stop at the petty pranks or the verbal abuse. No, it escalated. One day in high school, the atmosphere between David and me grew even more volatile. I still remember that day as if it happened just yesterday, the day David, without any warning, tried to set my hair on fire. It wasn't a prank or an accident. It was deliberate. He had gathered a few of his friends around, and they all stood watching as David, with an unsettling smirk on his face, approached me with a lighter. My heart raced as the flame flickered inches away from my face. I still don't understand what went through his mind. It wasn't until the fire alarmed my dad, who had been sitting in the next room, that he finally intervened. The sound of my father's voice, suddenly sharp and authoritative, startled me. He rushed over and yanked David's hand away. In that moment, I thought he was going to punish David. But instead, he just stood there, stunned and silent, looking at his son as if he couldn't comprehend what was happening. It was the first time I had seen my father take action, real action, to stop David. And it didn't feel like a victory. In fact, it felt hollow. David was threatened with a call to the police if he ever attempted anything like that again, but the weight of that moment didn't truly sink in until later that night. When my dad came to talk to me after everything had settled, he admitted something that changed the course of my life. He said, "I've been blind all these years. I thought it was just a phase, that David would grow out of it. But I see now, he's a bully." Hearing my father finally acknowledge the truth was like a weight being lifted off my chest. For the first time, my father, the man who had always been emotionally distant, truly saw me. He understood what I had been going through, what I had been enduring all this time. That night, for the first time, I cried. I cried because my father had finally opened his eyes, but I also cried because I had been carrying so much pain for so long. I had never felt safe in my own home, never felt like I mattered. I had grown up with the quiet belief that something was wrong with me, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve the love and care I craved. But now I realized it wasn't me. It was David. It was my mother. It was my family's favoritism and their refusal to see the damage being done. My dad didn't just apologize, though. He did something I never expected. He enrolled me in MMA classes. At first I thought he was joking. Me? A scrawny, quiet kid? I said. I couldn't imagine myself, someone who hated confrontation, who just wanted to be left alone, learning martial arts. But my dad was serious. He told me that I needed to learn how to defend myself, not just physically but emotionally as well. "You can't go through life letting people walk all over you," he said. "You need to fight back, not just with your fists but with your confidence." At first I balked. I wasn't sure I could do it. But something in his words resonated with me. It was as if he had given me permission to finally stand up for myself. So, I reluctantly started attending the classes, determined to prove to myself that I could change. In those early days I was a mess, struggling to keep up with the other students, barely able to do the warm-ups. But I kept pushing myself. With every class, my body grew stronger, my skills improved, and slowly I began to feel a shift inside me. I wasn't the same kid who let David walk all over him. I was becoming someone different, someone who could stand tall, even in the face of the people who had hurt me the most. The pain from the years of torment wasn't gone, not by a long shot. But for the first time I felt like I had the strength to confront it, to take control of my life. And with that, a small spark of hope ignited. Maybe, just maybe, I could fight back. Maybe I could finally take my life back from David, from my family, and from the silent torment that had defined so much of my existence. After everything that had happened, the idea of MMA seemed ridiculous at first. I couldn't picture myself, a scrawny, quiet teenager who had always avoided confrontation, putting on gloves and learning to fight. But there was something in my dad's voice, a quiet intensity that told me he wasn't joking. He wasn't asking me to fight to make him proud, or to prove anything to anyone else. He was asking me to fight for myself, to learn how to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. The first few days at the gym were brutal. I walked in feeling completely out of place. The other kids in my class were athletes, strong, confident, and used to physical activity. They moved like warriors while I felt like a fish out of water. I could barely keep up with the warm-up exercises, and I often found myself lagging behind, trying to catch my breath as the other students moved on to more advanced techniques. My body wasn't used to this kind of strain, and it showed. But what was worse than the physical exhaustion was the mental toll. Every punch I threw, every kick I attempted felt awkward and forced. I was constantly thinking about how out of place I was, how much I didn't belong there. I had never been a fighter, never been someone who embraced physicality. My comfort zone had always been my books, my thoughts, my quiet world. And now, I was being thrust into a world of aggression and physicality, two things that had terrified me for as long as I could remember. The first week was the hardest. I went home sore every day, my muscles aching from the unfamiliar exertion. I wanted to quit so many times. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why my dad had pushed me into this. Was I really so weak that I needed to learn how to fight? Wasn't it enough that I had survived all those years of emotional abuse and neglect? Wasn't it enough that I had learned how to cope without help? But then something began to change, slowly at first. As I kept going to the gym, I started to notice small improvements. The soreness that had once left me feeling drained after every class began to feel like a familiar discomfort, a sign that my body was changing, adapting to this new reality. My endurance improved. My punches became sharper, more controlled. I started to hold my own in sparring sessions. It wasn't just my body that was transforming, my mind was too. The more I trained, the more I began to understand that fighting wasn't about aggression. It wasn't about hitting harder or being stronger. It was about control. It was about mastering yourself, your body, your mind, your emotions. I started to realize that I wasn't just learning how to fight in a physical sense, I was learning how to fight for my own peace, for my own mental well-being. Every class, every hour I spent in that gym, was a small victory over the person I used to be, the shy, passive kid who had been walked all over by David, by my family, by everyone around me. With every jab, every kick, every round I completed, I was taking back a piece of myself. I wasn't just learning how to throw punches, I was learning how to stop letting people walk over me, how to stop letting my past dictate my future. As the weeks went by, the changes became more noticeable, both physically and mentally. I wasn't just stronger, I was more confident. I started walking taller, standing straighter. I didn't shrink in the presence of others anymore. At school, when David would insult me or mock me, I no longer felt the overwhelming urge to retreat, to hide in the shadows. Instead, I stood my ground. I made eye contact. I didn't flinch when he raised his voice or tried to belittle me. I began to feel like I had power, real power, for the first time in my life. I wasn't afraid of David anymore. I wasn't afraid of anyone anymore. One afternoon, about 3 months into my MMA training, something happened that changed everything. I had been saving up money for a new pair of shoes, a small, personal victory for me, as it was the first time I had ever set aside money for something that wasn't a necessity. It had taken me weeks of doing extra chores and cutting back on spending. I was proud of it. But when I went to get the money from my dresser drawer, it was gone. At first, I thought I had just misplaced it, but after searching everywhere, I realized that it had been stolen. I knew exactly who had taken it. David. He had always been the kind of person who took what he wanted without thinking of the consequences. He had stolen from me before, little things like my toys when we were younger or my books when he wanted to read them. But this time it wasn't just about a toy or a book. This time it was about me standing up for myself. I didn't go running to my parents. I didn't ask them for help. For the first time, I decided to confront David myself. I went straight to him, found him in his room, and demanded that he return the money. David just looked at me, his usual smug grin spreading across his face. "What are you going to do about it?" he mocked. For a moment, I hesitated. The old version of me, the one who had always backed down, the one who had been afraid of confrontation, wanted to shrink away. But then I remembered everything I had learned in the gym. I remembered the hours I had spent training, the physical and mental strength I had built. I wasn't that scared, quiet kid anymore. I had the power to stand up for myself. So I did. I told David to give the money back, and when he laughed in my face, I punched him. It wasn't an impulsive act of rage. It was measured, controlled, just like I had learned in my training. It was the first time I had ever physically stood up to him, and the look of shock on his face was something I would never forget. David had never expected me to fight back. He had always believed that he could get away with anything. But this time he couldn't. I took the money back and walked out of his room. I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't need one. The moment itself was enough. When our mother found out, she scolded me, of course. She always scolded me for standing up for myself. But when my dad heard the full story, he didn't side with David. For once, he stood by me and he told David that he was lucky I didn't press charges. That day marked a turning point. I wasn't weak anymore. I had found my voice. I had learned how to fight, how to stand up for myself, not just physically but emotionally. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. I felt free. After everything that had happened, the years of neglect, the cruelty, the gradual changes in me that only seemed to make David's treatment worse, life finally gave me a glimpse of what freedom could look like. The MMA training had transformed me in ways I didn't expect, not just physically but emotionally. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a voice, like I mattered. But little did I know, the hardest challenge I would face wasn't going to be with David or even my family. It was going to come from the one person I thought I could trust the most, Karen. Karen had entered my life when I was in college. I had always thought that if I found the right person, I could escape the shadows of my past, that maybe she could help me heal from the wounds I had carried for so long. And for a while, it seemed like everything was falling into place. Karen was everything I wanted in a partner. Kind, grounded, easy to talk to, and, most importantly, she saw me. She didn't see the broken, bruised version of me that had been molded by years of emotional neglect. She saw the person I was becoming. We met during my second year at university, introduced by a mutual friend at a party. I was skeptical at first. People had always seemed to treat me like an afterthought, like I was invisible. But Karen was different. She listened when I spoke. She made me feel like I mattered. We clicked instantly, and it wasn't long before we started dating seriously. For once, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have a future that didn't feel like it was haunted by the past. But things began moving quickly. We fell in love, and soon enough we were talking about marriage, building a life together. We were both young, still figuring out who we were, but we had a vision. The plan seemed perfect. We both came from conservative backgrounds, and we understood the weight of what starting a family outside of marriage meant. But when we found out she was pregnant in our final year, everything changed. It shook us both to the core. But despite the initial shock, I didn't hesitate. I loved her and I wanted to do the right thing. So, we got married immediately after graduation. Our wedding was small and intimate, but it felt perfect in that moment. It felt like we were beginning something beautiful, something real. The thought of raising a child together, of building a family, gave me hope. For the first time in my life, I believed in the idea of loyalty, of commitment, of sticking together no matter what. And for a while, it was all I ever wanted. Our life felt solid. We were even planning our future, perhaps another child, maybe buying a home. It felt like everything was finally aligning. But the foundation of my happiness, the peace I thought I had found, came crashing down when Karen sat me down one evening, her face pale and filled with an unfamiliar emptiness. Her voice was shaky as she spoke, her eyes avoiding mine. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I've been having an affair, and our son, he might not be yours." The words didn't register at first. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was saying. My world, which had felt like it was finally stable, suddenly seemed to tilt on its axis. It felt like the ground beneath me was slipping away, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss I didn't know existed. I remember staring at her, unable to speak, unable to breathe. It was as though the room had closed in around me. "What do you mean?" was all I could manage to say, my voice thick with disbelief. The story Karen told me was as twisted as it was painful. She admitted to having an affair with a coworker, a married man, and though it hurt, I had tried to rationalize it. We were young, we were both under stress, and I thought maybe this was just a mistake, something we could move past, something that could be forgiven. But then she told me something that shattered the fragile trust one had left. The man she had cheated with wasn't just any coworker. It was David, my own brother. I felt like I had been struck with a punch to the gut. My breath left me, my heart seemed to stop, and all I could do was stare at her, trying to process what she was saying. My brother. The one who had made my life a living hell for so many years. The one who had humiliated me, belittled me, and stolen from me. And now, he had taken something that I had held dearer than anything, my family. Karen's voice trembled as she explained. She said it had started innocently enough, that they had bonded during the holidays, when she stayed with us from Thanksgiving to New Year's. She described how David had been vulnerable, how they had shared conversations, and how it had escalated into something more. My mind raced as I listened to her recount every detail. The affair had continued even after she married me, after we had our son. She admitted to lying to me, to covering up their meetings in hotels, to carrying on a secret life while I had been blissfully unaware. The room felt suffocating. I couldn't process the weight of her betrayal, couldn't comprehend how the two people I trusted most, my wife and my brother, had destroyed everything I had worked so hard to build. I thought back to all the moments when I had given them my trust, my love, when I had believed in the bond we shared as a family. And now I realized it had all been a lie. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stood up, silently packed my things and walked out the door. I couldn't bear to be in the same room with her, with him. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. I couldn't even look at my son, the child I had loved and raised, knowing that he might not even be mine. Everything I had believed in, everything I had fought for, felt like it had been ripped away from me. I left that night, staying at a hotel, and for the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly alone. I felt like I had no one, nothing. I couldn't bear the thought of facing my parents, of having to explain this. And yet, somewhere deep down, I knew that I had to. I had to confront David. I had to confront my family. The betrayal had gone too far. There could be no going back. The days that followed Karen's confession were a blur. I felt like I was drifting through life, numb to everything around me. The weight of her betrayal, combined with the revelation that my own brother, the person who had tormented me for years, had stolen the one thing I loved most, crushed me in ways I couldn't put into words. I moved through the motions of everyday life, but nothing felt real anymore. I had spent so many years trying to build something, a life, a family, a future, that now seemed to have evaporated in the blink of an eye. I tried to find solace in the familiar routines that had once given me comfort, but nothing could fill the emptiness that had opened up inside me. I stayed in my hotel room for days, drowning in my thoughts, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. My trust in people, something that had always been a fundamental part of who I was, had been shattered. My wife, the woman I had married, the woman I had thought I could build a life with, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. But it wasn't just her. I had to face the fact that my brother, the one person who should have had my back, had broken me more than anyone else. I spent a lot of time wrestling with my feelings of anger, confusion, and hurt. For so long, I had tried to prove to myself that I was strong, that I could overcome anything. But this was different. I had been deceived by the people closest to me. I had given my heart to them, trusted them with my deepest emotions, and they had turned that trust into something ugly. I didn't know where to turn or who to trust anymore. I thought about cutting everyone out of my life, Karen, David, even my parents. But something inside me told me that I couldn't let this break me. I had been broken for far too long. It was time to fight back. It wasn't easy. It was painful, and there were moments when I doubted myself, when I wanted to crawl back into the hole I had spent so many years trying to escape. But then I remembered something my dad had told me when he enrolled me in MMA. You can't go through life letting people walk all over you. You need to fight back, not just with your fists but with your confidence. Those words had stuck with me, and they felt even more significant now. This wasn't just about standing up to David, to Karen, or even to my parents. This was about standing up to myself. I needed to reclaim my power, to remember that I wasn't the person they had made me feel like. I wasn't weak. I wasn't a victim. I had the strength to take control of my life no matter how much it hurt. I decided to confront Karen first. I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to face her, had to hear the truth straight from her mouth. I had to know why she did it, what had driven her to betray me. I met her at a small cafe, one of the places we used to go when things were good between us. Seeing her again was like being slapped with reality. The woman I had trusted with my heart was sitting across from me, her face full of regret and guilt. But I wasn't sure if I could ever look at her the same way again. When I sat down, she immediately apologized. Her words were full of remorse, but they felt hollow to me. I made a huge mistake, she said, her voice breaking. I was wrong. I don't know why I did it. It wasn't about you. It was about me, and I was weak, and I'm so sorry. I listened to her, but every word she said felt like it was just a patch on the deep wound she had caused. I asked her why with David of all people. It was never supposed to happen, she explained, her eyes downcast. It started innocently enough, and then, I don't know. I never meant for it to get this far. I was confused, and he understood me in ways you didn't. I know that doesn't excuse what happened, and I'm sorry. But it happened. And now I have to live with it. Her confession hit me like a wave of ice water. The woman I had loved had found comfort in my brother, the same person who had been cruel to me for years. It stung, and I wanted to scream at her, to demand an explanation that would make sense of the madness. But I knew deep down that it wouldn't change anything. The truth was ugly, and nothing she said could take it back. After she finished speaking, I took a deep breath. I had to make a decision. I could forgive her, but I knew I could never forget. Trust, once broken, couldn't be easily repaired. I realized that I couldn't live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if the next betrayal would come. I stood up, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. I can't do this anymore, Karen. I can't rebuild what's been destroyed. You betrayed me, and you hurt me in a way I can't forgive. I need to walk away. Her face crumpled as she tried to apologize again, but I couldn't hear it. I had made up my mind. I didn't need closure from her. I needed to close this chapter of my life. I walked away that day, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was reclaiming my power. The next step was confronting David. I couldn't let him off the hook, not this time. I knew that if I didn't confront him, I would never feel free. I called him, told him to meet me. When we sat across from each other, the tension between us was palpable. There was no friendly banter, no pretending that things could go back to normal. He knew I knew everything, and he knew there was no hiding from the truth. When I confronted him, his first reaction was what I had expected: denial. It wasn't like that, he said, trying to twist the situation to make it seem like Karen was the one who had pursued him. She came onto me first. I never meant for it to happen. But I wasn't buying it. I had heard enough of his lies over the years to know that nothing he said would be the truth. You took something from me, David, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. You took my trust. You took my family. And for that, there's no excuse. David tried to deflect, to turn the blame back onto me. He told me that I was being unfair, that I should forgive him. But I wasn't the same person I had been when we were younger. I wasn't the person who would sit in silence and let him walk all over me. This time I stood firm. I'm done with you, I said. I've spent my whole life trying to please you, trying to make you care. But I'm not doing that anymore. You're not my brother. Not anymore. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But in that moment, I realized that I was finally taking control of my life. I wasn't going to let David manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone steal my peace. The next few days were painful, but I began to heal. I had stood up for myself in ways I had never thought possible. I had cut out the toxic people who had defined my life for so long, and I knew that this was the beginning of something new. The days that followed my confrontations with Karen and David felt surreal, like I was walking through a fog, unsure of where I was going but certain that I couldn't go back. My entire world had shifted in the course of a few weeks, and I was no longer the same person I had been just a short time ago. I had made the decision to let go of the toxic relationships that had plagued my life for so long. The emotional weight that had been dragging me down for years had finally been lifted, and for the first time I felt like I could breathe again. I spent the first few weeks in solitude, allowing myself the space to heal. I didn't want to rush into anything, not even the idea of moving on. The truth was, I had spent so much of my life focusing on everyone else, their needs, their emotions, their opinions, that I had forgotten about my own. I had given up pieces of myself over the years, always trying to make others happy, always trying to fit into the mold that was created for me. Now, for the first time, I was focused on me. I started going back to the gym, not because I needed to, but because it felt like the one thing in my life that remained consistent. MMA wasn't just a form of self-defense anymore. It was a way for me to continue rebuilding the person I wanted to be. Each session felt like a small victory, like I was reclaiming another part of myself. The physical strength I had gained through training was important, but the emotional resilience I was developing was even more valuable. It reminded me that no matter how broken I had felt in the past, I had the power to put myself back together, piece by piece. The hardest part, however, was the loneliness. Even though I had cut ties with the people who had hurt me, I couldn't help but feel the absence of the relationships I had once held dear. I thought about Karen sometimes, wondering if she was truly sorry, if she had learned from the mistakes she had made. But as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't look back. I couldn't keep holding on to a past that had only caused me pain. And as for David, the idea of ever seeing him again seemed impossible. He had been my brother, the person who had shared so much of my life with me, but the betrayal he had committed was something I could never forgive. I realized, though, that letting go of them didn't mean I had to give up on the idea of family or love. It just meant that I had to redefine what those things meant for me. I had spent so many years believing that family had to look a certain way, that loyalty had to come from people who had shared blood with me. But now I knew better. Family wasn't defined by shared genetics or old memories, it was defined by love, respect, and mutual support. And I had been looking for those things in all the wrong places. Over time, I began to build new relationships. At first, it was small, getting to know my classmates at college, talking to people at the gym, finding new friends who understood what I had been through. Slowly, I surrounded myself with people who were kind, who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. I began to see that there was more to life than the toxic relationships I had clung to for so long. I learned to set boundaries, to protect my peace, and to walk away from situations that didn't serve me. I had learned, finally, that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. One evening, I decided to visit my parents. It had been a few months since everything had fallen apart, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I had spent so many years trying to earn their love and approval, but after everything that had happened, I didn't know if they would ever see me for who I truly was. I had made the difficult decision to confront them about what had transpired between David and Karen. I knew that they had to understand the depth of the betrayal I had experienced. When I arrived at their house, I was surprised to see that my mother looked different. She seemed less defensive, more open, as if the time had softened her. My father, too, appeared to have aged in the time since we had last spoken. He didn't look as strong as he used to. There was a weariness in his eyes that reflected everything we had gone through as a family. I sat down across from them, and for a long moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of silence between us. It was my father who finally spoke. "We've been trying to understand what happened," he said, his voice low and filled with regret. "We failed you, son. We didn't see what was going on with David. And for that, I'm sorry." His words were unexpected, and they struck me in a way I wasn't prepared for. For so long, I had wanted my parents to see me, to acknowledge the pain I had been carrying. I had wanted them to understand that their favoritism, their blind loyalty to David, had left me feeling invisible. And now here was my father admitting his mistakes. My mother too spoke. "I never realized how much I hurt you," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "I thought I was just doing what was best, but I see now that I pushed you away. I'm so sorry, and I want to do better. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I hope we can rebuild slowly." The conversation that followed wasn't easy. It wasn't a magical moment where everything was suddenly perfect, but it was a start. We talked about the past, about the things I had endured, and about how we could move forward. I didn't expect everything to change overnight, but hearing them admit their wrongs and taking responsibility for their actions felt like a step in the right direction. It was a new kind of healing that I hadn't known was possible. As time passed, I continued to rebuild my life. I graduated college with honors, a testament to the hard work I had put into my education and my personal growth. I found a job that gave me purpose, and I began to travel, to experience the world outside of the narrow confines I had grown up in. I learned to be independent, to trust myself, and to embrace the person I was becoming. And most importantly, I learned that it was never too late to start over. No matter how broken you are, no matter how deep the wounds, there is always a chance to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready, it moves on whether you're prepared or not. But with time, with effort, and with the strength to walk away from the things that no longer serve you, it is possible to find peace, to find love, and to find yourself again. The key lesson from this story is the importance of setting boundaries and protecting one's emotional well-being, even when it involves difficult decisions like severing toxic relationships. Throughout the narrative, the narrator endures years of mistreatment from his brother and wife, believing that forgiveness and reconciliation might heal the wounds. However, as the situation escalates, the narrator learns that some actions, especially betrayal, are beyond forgiveness and can only be dealt with by cutting ties for good. This story teaches that at any stage in life, we must prioritize our mental and emotional health, even if it means walking away from people we once loved or thought we owed something to. Sometimes, holding on to relationships that cause harm can prevent us from growing and finding peace. The journey toward healing requires the courage to let go of toxic individuals, no matter how deep the connection may seem. For older adults, this is a reminder that it's never too late to reclaim peace and happiness by distancing oneself from people or situations that continuously bring pain. Life is too short to carry emotional baggage, and the ability to walk away from what hurts us can lead to greater fulfillment, freedom, and personal growth in the later years of life. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you found the story insightful and thought-provoking. If you got value from this video, go ahead and drop a 1 in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. Sharing this video with others who might benefit from it would mean a lot as well. Lastly, let me know how you felt about the video in the comments. Your feedback is always appreciated and helps us improve. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.